This is a conflict between two brothers, are one of the first few sentences spoken by Abdulnaabo, who grew up in Liban, a district in the Borana region of Oromia, Ethiopia, and who now lives in the diaspora. Guji and Borana have lived together since time immemorial, Abdulnaabo describes. According to Abdulnaabo, the two clans are so close relationally that they do not intermarry unless they identify, through the Gada institution's codification system, that there are no familial relationships. In the last week of February 2023, residents of the Guji administrative zone of Oromia began a protest movement resisting the decision made by the Oromia regional government to establish the new East Borana administrative zone. In order to fulfill administrative requirements like population size, this new zone would also have to incorporate parts of the Bale zone. Overall, the new East Borana zone comprises the eastern regions of the Borana, Guji and Bale zones, and this restructuring means the capital of Guji, Gulale, and the culturally significant and even sacred lands of Guji-Borana in the Bale zone will also join the East Borana zone. As an activist and journalist who is avidly engaged in the social and political conditions of Oromia and the rest of the country, what struck me immediately was the information that this administrative decision was passed without the completion of due court processes that were underway. My second instinct was to pay attention to the ways that this lack of respect for public engagement in this decision could be connected to extractive economic projects and interests in the region, particularly given that Guji is renowned for its abundance of the mineral resource gold. Upon engaging the matter further through conversation and research, it's evident that the matter is far more complex, connected to matters of identity in the Oromia region, and sits on the backdrop of a layered and important historical context. Emerging in the 1960s with the establishment of the Oromo Liberation Front, with the intention of re-establishing a state of political, economic, and social sovereignty that the Oromo experienced prior to Abyssinian colonization. This was taking place at the same time much of the colonial world was pursuing similar decolonization. Prior to this, the many Oromo clans and sub-clans organized themselves using the Gada system, allowing them to manage local day-to-day affairs as Guji, Hararge, Shawa, Arsi, Wallaka, etc., but also providing these clans and sub-clans with political and social infrastructure to collectivize decision-making processes that would affect people across the geographical region that Oromo people were settled in. It is with this in mind that we can understand how and why a nuanced and historical conflict rooted in identity, land ownership, and power struggle has existed between the Guji and Borana people, with this conflict also extending triangularly between the Guji, Borana, and Arsi. Abdulnaabo describes that some 150 years ago, a peace agreement was reached between the Guji, Borana, and Arsi, who had been warring with each other over land, power, and identity for many decades. The previous capital of Guji, Gulale, now part of the newly created East Borana zone, was known as Arso Bilbilo and was renamed Gulale as part of the peace process. Gulale is a derivative of the word Naga in Afan Oromo, which means peace. Conflict, particularly between the Guji and Borana, didn't completely cease though. When the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, also known as the EPRDF, established multinationalism after the fall of the Derg regime, the Guji were incorporated into the Borana zone. Through extensive advocacy, including an appeal to the Prime Minister's office, the Guji zone was created in September 2002. Still, the parameters of the region left a large population of Guji people in the Borana zone, so the West Guji zone was created. The question of who Gulale, a vibrant and popular city, belongs to has been a recurring contentious issue. The protest movement that has recently ensued is reminiscent of the large-scale conflict over the ownership of the city that took place in 2017. The Borana see Gulale as a symbol of Borana identity, says Abdulnaabo. Following on by noting that even though this may be the case, the Guji outnumber the Borana by way of population size inhabiting the city. According to Abdulnaabo, the way that the decision to create the new zone has been made violates a social and political agreement between the Guji and Borana to use cultural, grassroots processes of dialogue to negotiate any further debates and dilemmas regarding land ownership and identity. It is also reminiscent, Abdulnaabo shares, of a historical dynamic between the state, the Guji, and the Borana, where the Borana have traditionally had friendlier relations with successive Ethiopian regimes, whereas the Guji have traditionally resisted the state and thus existed on its social, political, and economic margins. Although Borana people may feel differently about this narrative and consider it an unfair depiction of their contributions to the Oromo struggle, the Oromia regional government's decision to create the new zone without engaging due public process is an injustice. It could even be considered to be a deliberate attempt to divide and pit communities against each other, particularly given the fact that this stalemate is taking place in an active conflict zone, where the Ethiopian federal and regional governments are in conflict with the Oromo Liberation Army, who have a significant presence in the Guji region. In this can't be forgotten that the incorporation of Eastern Bale zones, namely Abdulnaabo, a sacred site of ceremony, cultural and spiritual heritage for the RC people, is also being resisted by the people, and similarly to the Guji and Borana dynamic, triggers old wounds that ancestors of all three clans had strived to put to rest centuries ago. On the 3rd of March, Addis Standard reported that at least 3 civilians were killed and 2 were injured in the Bore district, and several others were arrested in the ongoing protests. Alamo mentions that the regional government has told the 2 communities to sit and negotiate the terms of the new zone. The Guji have refused, stating that the only acceptable remedial action is that the new zone be dissolved altogether. The protests in the Guji region have sustained, extending to mass actions including economic boycotts shutting down a majority of the region's economic activity for days at a time. Like much of Oromia and Ethiopia's political issues, this conflict will require a seriously honest and intentional dialogue that is able to make connections between the past and the present. Moreover, the role of the state in exacerbating issues and in this dialogue must be critically assessed. The redrawing of borders by a state that has never been established through democratic grassroots consensus, and the relationship that the masses have to these state processes, is a symptom of the deeper and broader political issues that Oromia is facing today.